"This painting you are looking at is worth absolutely zero." That's what America's top art experts told Leah, ordering her to burn it immediately to save her family's name from utter ruin. But right before the flames could touch the canvas, the old night janitor, the man everyone had ignored for weeks, suddenly stepped forward. He pressed a hidden microscopic knot in the antique wooden frame, unlocking a secret that shook the foundations of an international syndicate and reopened a 30-year-old assassination mystery. Watch until the very end, because what they discovered beneath that modern paint wasn't just colors, it was a terrifying legal trap waiting for this exact moment to strike. The rain in Boston did not wash away the scent of betrayal. It clung to the red brick walls of Harrison and Vance Restoration House. Inside, the air smelled of dried canvas, centuries-old lacquer, and expensive lies. Leah stood before the centerpiece of the grand gallery. Her fingers trembled against the edge of a thick, leather-bound dossier. 30 years, 5 international laboratories, meticulous chemical formulas, spectral scans. Every single one reached the exact same cold, surgical conclusion. The masterpiece inherited from her late grandfather was a worthless, calculated fake. It was a counterfeit so precise it had fooled her family for a generation. Beside her stood Julian, the city's most celebrated art appraiser. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes reflecting the cool gallery lights. He did not look at the art. He looked at Leah's despair. With a practiced, dismissive sigh, Julian closed his gold-plated fountain pen. He told her to burn it. He said keeping a proven fraud was a stain on her family's prominent name. He suggested selling the frame for firewood. Leah felt the room spin. Her grandfather's entire life was wrapped in that canvas. Burning it meant accepting he was a fraud. But drama does not always wear a tailored suit. Sometimes it carries a toolbox. From the dark perimeter of the room, a low shadow moved. Arthur, the night janitor, stopped his brass-wheeled cart. He was 62, his spine slightly curved from decades of uncelebrated labor. His hands were thick, rough, and permanently stained with a faint trace of charcoal. He had worked at the house for only 3 weeks, invisible to the elite. No one knew his past. No one asked. He stepped into the light, his gaze fixed not on the painting's fading colors, but on the bottom right corner of the heavy oak frame. He did not bow his head. He looked directly at Leah. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp that cut through the silence. He told them that the experts were looking at the brushstrokes, but the brushstrokes were meant to deceive. The real truth was buried 3 inches deeper, where the iron met the pine. Julian's face tightened into a thin, venomous smile. He ordered Arthur to leave the room, threatening immediate termination. He mocked the idea of a janitor offering an artistic opinion. But Leah felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. She saw Arthur's eyes. They were not the eyes of a janitor. They were the eyes of a hunter who had finally located a long-lost trail. She ignored Julian. She gave Arthur permission to speak. The old man took a single slow step forward. He did not touch the canvas. He reached behind his back and drew a long, rusted steel awl from his uniform pocket. He tapped the lower iron rivet of the frame once. A hollow metallic ring echoed through the cavernous gallery. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in solid wood.
Arthur looked at Julian, then at Leah. He told them that a masterpiece is never hidden in plain sight. It is imprisoned. Before Julian could call security, Arthur pressed his thumb hard against a microscopic knot in the wood. A sharp, mechanical click split the quiet air. The entire left border of the frame slid outward by exactly 2 inches, revealing a hidden seam of oiled cloth trapped inside the antique structure.
The gallery became a vacuum. Julian's hand froze mid-air, his phone hovering inches from his ear. Leah held her breath, her eyes locked on the dark line of oilcloth emerging from the ancient timber. Arthur did not hurry. Slowness was his armor. With precise, deliberate movements, his rough fingers extracted the tightly wrapped bundle from the frame's secret cavity. He laid it flat on the velvet-topped viewing table. He unrolled the cloth. Inside was not another canvas. It was a collection of yellowed, handwritten ledger pages from 1974, bound by a faded blue silk ribbon. Leah leaned forward, her heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized the precise, elegant cursive immediately. It was her grandfather's handwriting. But it wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of secret payments. Millions of dollars transferred to a Swiss account named Veritas. The final entry was dated 3 days before her grandfather's mysterious, fatal car accident. Next to the final amount was a single, terrifying word written in red: extortion. Questions multiplied like shadows. If the painting was a fake, why would her grandfather pay millions to protect it? Who was extorting him? The financial records indicated that the money was drawn directly from the gallery's core reserve fund, a move that originally triggered the family's financial ruin 30 years ago. Julian stepped forward, his breathing suddenly shallow. His calm demeanor had completely vanished. He reached out to grab the ledger, claiming it was legal property of the appraisal house under the original evaluation contract. But Arthur moved with shocking fluid speed. His heavy, scarred hand slammed down onto the papers, pinning them to the table. The impact sounded like a gunshot. Arthur didn't look at Julian. He kept his eyes on Leah. He told her that her grandfather never owned a fake. He owned the original. But 30 years ago, a syndicate of highly respected dealers orchestrated a swap. They stole the authentic piece, replaced it with a flawless forgery, and forced her grandfather into silence by threatening to ruin his reputation with the very counterfeit they created. Leah's world tilted. The injustice was staggering. Her family's legacy, her grandfather's tragic end, all built on a massive, calculated fraud. She demanded to know how a night janitor could possibly know these intimate, dangerous secrets. Arthur slowly reached for his collar. He unbuttoned the top of his grey uniform, pulling back the fabric to reveal a small, tarnished silver lapel pin hidden beneath the cotton. It was the insignia of the Royal Restorers Guild of Munich, the highest and most exclusive honor in the art world, stripped only from those who crossed the powerful. Julian stumbled backward, his face turning an ash-grey color. He recognized the pin. He muttered a name he hadn't spoken in decades, a name whispered in the dark corners of the art black market. He looked at the old man and asked if he was truly the legendary master who vanished after the Munich scandal of 1995. Arthur smiled a cold, humorless smile. He told them that he didn't vanish. He was buried by the same people who took her grandfather's life, and one of those people was currently standing in this very room, holding an appraisal pen. Julian's arrogance returned, but it was brittle now. He laughed, a high, strained sound that echoed hollowly off the high ceilings. He told Arthur that a disgraced old man with a criminal record from Munich carried no weight in an American court of law. He turned to Leah, his voice dropping into a manipulative, soothing tone. He reminded her that without the physical original painting, these old papers were nothing but ancient gossip. He warned her that pushing this absurd theory would destroy her family's remaining credit line and bankrupt her estate by Tuesday morning. He was right about one thing. The law required cold, undeniable proof. The original canvas was worth $40 million. The forgery in front of them was worth $0. But Arthur had expected this move. He had been playing this chess game in his mind for 30 years. He knew the syndicate's playbook by heart because they had used it to erase his own life. The old man walked over to his janitor's cart. He lifted a heavy industrial plastic jug labeled Industrial Solvent 4. He walked back to the masterpiece. Julian panicked. He screamed for security, shouting that the crazy janitor was going to destroy a multi-million-dollar asset. He tried to physically block Arthur, but Leah stepped between them, her gaze steady and fierce. She told Julian that if the painting was already a worthless fake, as he claimed, its destruction mattered to no one. She looked at Arthur and gave the command to proceed. Arthur did not pour the chemical. He dipped a clean cotton swab into the clear liquid, squeezing out the excess with extreme care. He approached the top left corner of the sky painted on the canvas. The room grew so quiet that the dripping rain outside sounded like thunder. Arthur applied the swab to the paint. He did not scrub. He rotated the cotton with a gentle circular motion. The blue oil paint did not dissolve. Instead, under the reaction of the specialized solvent, the top layer of modern pigment began to peel away cleanly like an old sticker. But it didn't reveal bare canvas beneath. It revealed a brilliant, incandescent layer of genuine 17th century lapis lazuli glaze. The forgery wasn't a separate painting. The original was painted underneath a temporary, water-soluble layer of modern acrylics. The thieves had never smuggled the original out of the building. They had hidden it in plain sight, waiting for the statute of limitations to expire. Julian dropped his phone. It shattered on the marble floor. Arthur pulled away the cotton swab. He looked at the glowing, ancient blue paint, then turned his gaze slowly toward the gallery's security cameras. He whispered that the trap wasn't just hidden under the paint, it was also wired into the network. The revealing layer of lapis lazuli throbbed under the gallery spotlights like a beating heart. Leah felt a wave of absolute fury wash over her grief. Her grandfather had been driven to his grave protecting a secret that was painted over with cheap synthetic chemicals. Julian stared at his shattered phone on the floor, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The sophisticated appraiser looked like a ghost trapped in a cage of his own making. Arthur stood perfectly still, the industrial solvent emitting a sharp medical odor into the air. He told Leah that the original heist required an inside hand, a young assistant appraiser back in 1994 who altered the shipping manifests and signed the falsified certificates. That assistant was Julian. Julian's eyes darted toward the heavy exit doors. He pulled his posture together, his voice shaking with a desperate defensive rage. He told them that even if this was the original layer, they could prove nothing in a courtroom. The signatures on the authentication documents belonged to dead men. The digital files from that era were wiped clean. He reminded Leah that his firm possessed the exclusive legal right of representation for her estate's art collection. If she tried to remove the painting without his signature, he would file an injunction before sunset, seizing the asset legally for years. He thought he had found the exit door. He thought his corporate shield was completely impenetrable. Arthur walked back to his cleaning cart, his heavy boots squeaking against the polished marble. He reached into the bottom compartment, past the dirty rags and plastic spray bottles. He pulled out a sleek military-grade encrypted tablet. It was completely out of place in a janitor's hands. He tapped the screen twice. A live audio feed began to play through the gallery's high-end sound system. It was Julian's voice. The recording was from exactly 10 minutes ago, clear and unmistakable. The speakers boomed with Julian's private phone conversation with an unknown buyer in Zurich, discussing the immediate liquidation of the Harrison collection before the old man discovered the secret frame seam. Julian choked on his breath. Wiretapping was a federal crime. He screamed that the recording was illegal and completely inadmissible in any court of law. Arthur did not disagree. He nodded calmly. He told Julian that under Massachusetts law, a private recording without consent cannot be used in a standard trial. But then he tapped the tablet screen a third time. The live feed changed. It showed a high-definition video of the entire gallery space, broadcasted in real time. Arthur pointed to a small blue government seal glowing at the top corner of the screen. He told Julian that this wasn't a private recording. This gallery was classified as a federal cultural heritage site under a special application filed by Leah's grandfather before his death. The security system was directly linked to the National Art Crime Authority. Julian hadn't been talking to a private room. He had been confessing directly to a live federal monitor. The sound of heavy, synchronous footsteps began to echo from the grand staircase outside the heavy mahogany doors.
The grand mahogany doors did not open with a violent crash. They were unlocked from the outside with a quiet, authoritative click. 4 men in dark, unbranded tactical suits stepped into the room. They did not carry weapons in their hands, but their presence carried the absolute weight of the state. On their lapels sat the gold and blue badges of the Federal Art Crime Unit. Behind them walked an elderly gentleman in a simple grey wool coat. It was Gerald Whitmore, the lifelong personal attorney of Leah's late grandfather. He held a sealed, red-ribboned legal folder. He did not look at Julian. He walked straight to Leah and bowed his head in deep respect. He told her that the clock had finally run out. Julian backed away until his spine hit a marble pillar. He stammered, demanding to know how a federal unit could mobilize without a formal court warrant signed by a local magistrate. Gerald Whitmore opened the red-ribboned folder with slow, deliberate precision. He pulled out a document dated November 12, 1994. It carried the official seal of the United States Treasury Department. He explained to Julian that 30 years ago, Leah's grandfather knew he could not fight the syndicate openly without risking his family's lives, so he played a longer game. He legally transferred the ownership of the masterpiece not to his heirs, but to a blind federal trust managed by the government. The trust had a single, specific activation condition. It would remain dormant until the master restorer who designed the frame manually unlocked the secret mechanism. Julian's eyes widened with sudden, absolute comprehension. He looked at Arthur. The janitor wasn't an employee hired by an agency. He was the designated key holder appointed by the government 3 decades ago. The federal agents moved forward without a word. They bypassed the painting entirely. The lead agent placed a heavy steel handcuffs around Julian's wrists. The metallic click of the locks sounded like the final period at the end of a long, dark sentence. The agent informed Julian that he was being detained under the National Heritage Protection Act. His assets, his firm's accounts, and his international properties were being frozen immediately under federal seizure warrants. Every single transaction he had authorized for 30 years was now subject to criminal audit. Julian did not shout. The shock had robbed him of his voice. He was led out of the gallery, his polished shoes dragging silently against the cold marble floor. But the room was still not empty. Leah turned slowly toward Arthur. The old man was already returning his tools to his gray janitor's cart. The vengeance was complete, cold, and legally absolute, but the biggest secret of the night was still waiting in the dark corner of the room.
The federal vehicle sirens faded into the distance, leaving the gallery in a state of surreal stillness. Leah walked over to the viewing table, where her grandfather's handwritten ledger lay open under the soft lights. She looked at Arthur. He had his faded canvas jacket back on, his maintenance card fully packed. He looked like a man who was ready to walk out into the cold night and disappear into the city lines once more. She stepped into his path, her voice soft but filled with immense gratitude. She told him that he had sacrificed his entire life, his career in Munich, and his reputation just to protect her grandfather's memory. She asked him why he waited 30 long years to execute this perfect trap. Arthur stopped. He looked down at his rough, charcoal-stained hands. A faint, genuine smile appeared on his weathered face. He told her that he didn't wait 30 years for revenge. He waited for her. He explained that her grandfather knew the syndicate was too powerful to defeat back then. They controlled the judges, the media, and the appraisers. If the original painting had been revealed while Leah was a child, she would have become a prime target for the people who caused her grandfather's accident. Her grandfather made Arthur swear an oath to wait until she turned 35, the age she would inherit the full chairmanship of the family's design firm. He needed her to be strong enough, smart enough, and legally powerful enough to hold the asset once it was uncovered. The last puzzle piece fell into place. The janitor wasn't just a restorer or a federal key holder. He was a guardian angel who had lived in poverty and obscurity for 30 decades to keep a promise to a dead friend. Leah felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt since her grandfather passed away. She took the handwritten ledger and tucked it safely into her pocket. She looked at the grand painting, now glowing with its true ancient blue colors under the gallery lights. She told Arthur that the Harrison Restoration House no longer needed a night janitor. It needed a technical director of special assets, a position with full autonomy, a corporate suite, and the power to hunt down every other stolen piece the syndicate had hidden across the world. Arthur looked at the painting one last time. He did not say yes, and he did not say no. He simply took off his work cap, revealing his silver hair under the lights. He looked at Leah, his eyes clear and full of peace. For the first time in 30 years, his hands were entirely still. 3 days passed, but the echoes of Julian's arrest continued to shatter the upper echelons of the Boston art market. The news headlines were vague, speaking only of a federal cultural asset seizure, but the right people understood the message. Leah sat in her grandfather's private study, a room locked for 3 decades. The air inside was heavy with the smell of old paper and cedar wood. Across the large mahogany desk sat Arthur, wearing a dark wool coat that replaced his grey janitor uniform. On the desk lay 3 separate black leather binders that Arthur had pulled from a secure vault beneath his modest apartment. These binders did not contain art analysis. They contained names, bank routing numbers, and corporate registries. The network that destroyed Arthur's career in Munich wasn't an isolated group of appraisers. It was an international shadow corporation named Vanguard Arts Group. Arthur pointed a thick, calloused finger at a name listed at the top of the 1995 Munich registry. The name was Marcus Vance, the current senior partner of Leah's own firm, Harrison and Vance. Leah felt her breath catch in her throat. Marcus Vance had been her father's closest childhood friend. He was the man who delivered the eulogy at her grandfather's funeral. He was the man who comforted her mother when the family assets were frozen 30 years ago. The betrayal wasn't just corporate, it was deeply personal, woven into the very fabric of her daily life. Arthur explained that Marcus Vance was the brilliant architect behind the entire swap system. He utilized Julian to sign local certificates while he operated the international transport lines. Leah's shock transformed into a cold, calculated desire for justice. She realized that Julian's arrest was just a tremor. Marcus Vance was the epicenter of the earthquake. She asked Arthur what their next move should be. Arthur did not suggest going to the police. He told her that Vance was too well connected. A standard police report would be leaked within 20 minutes, allowing him to destroy his digital servers in Zurich. He told her that if you want to catch a predator of Vance's caliber, you do not hunt him in his territory. You make him walk into yours. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small glass vial containing a dense, milky white solution. He placed it on the desk between them. He told her that Marcus Vance was hosting the annual Winter Gala in this very building in 48 hours, and this chemical compound would be his invitation to his own downfall. The grand ballroom of the Harrison Gallery was a sea of black tuxedos and silk dresses. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the wealthy benefactors of the Boston art scene. Marcus Vance stood at the center of the room, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, his posture projecting absolute control and unshakable power. He was a man of 60, with sharp features and a perfectly groomed grey beard. He smiled warmly as he greeted the city's elite, entirely unaware that the federal authorities had already locked Julian in a detention cell 10 miles away. Julian's disappearance had been masked as an emergency medical leave, a cover story orchestrated carefully by Gerald Whitmore. Leah watched him from the balcony above, her hands resting on the cold wrought-iron railing. She wore a tailored, high-necked emerald dress with a matching modest wrap covering her hair. Beside her stood Arthur, his presence completely unnoticed by the security guards below. The moment had arrived. Marcus Vance stepped onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom to deliver his keynote address. He spoke eloquently of legacy, honor, and the preservation of historic beauty for future generations. Every word he spoke felt like a physical strike against Leah's chest. He praised her grandfather's memory, calling him his greatest mentor. Arthur leaned closer to Leah and whispered that it was time to change the script. He handed her a small wireless flash drive. Leah walked down the grand staircase, her movements graceful and deliberate. She approached the tech booth behind the crowd. The technician recognized her immediately as the firm's chairwoman and stepped aside when she instructed him to update the presentation files. She plugged a drive into the main terminal. On the stage, Marcus Vance gestured to the massive digital projector screen behind him. He announced that he was about to reveal the firm's newest acquisition, a rare 17th-century landscape painting purchased from a private collection in Vienna. But when the screen flickered to life, it did not show a painting. It showed a high-resolution scan of the 1974 extortion ledger pages, complete with Marcus Vance's original signature at the bottom of the transaction line. The ballroom fell into a sudden, icy silence. The whispers died instantly. Marcus Vance froze mid-sentence, his face turning completely pale under the stage lights. He stared at his own signature, his eyes widening in absolute terror as he realized the past had finally broken through the wall. The silence in the grand ballroom was broken by a single, sharp sound. Marcus Vance dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood stage, the water pooling around his custom leather shoes. He tried to speak, his voice cracking through the microphone, claiming that the image on the screen was a malicious digital hack, a desperate fabrication designed to ruin his reputation. He ordered his security team to clear the room and shut down the power grid immediately. But the security guards didn't move. They remained stationed at the exits, their eyes fixed on a man who had just stepped out of the shadow of the tech booth. Arthur walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. He did not rush. His boots made a rhythmic, heavy sound against the floor. He reached the edge of the stage and looked up at Vance. He told the microphone that 30 years ago, Marcus Vance signed that ledger using a specialized permanent iron gall ink, an ink that leaves a specific microscopic chemical signature that can never be replicated by modern printers or digital manipulation. He revealed that the original physical ledger was currently in the hands of the Federal Forensic Laboratory, and the match was 100% absolute. Vance's hand began to shake violently. He looked around the room for his corporate allies, but every prominent figure in the crowd was backing away from him, isolating him on the stage. The trap was tightening, but the final legal strike was still to come. Gerald Whittemore stepped forward from the back of the room, holding an open satellite phone connected to a live court broadcaster. He announced to the entire ballroom that under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the federal government had just issued an emergency asset freeze on the entirety of Vanguard Arts Group and its subsidiaries, including Marcus Vance's personal accounts. Every gallery, every bank vault, and every offshore account owned by Vance was legally locked. He was no longer a powerful billionaire. He was a legal entity with zero access to capital. Vance realized he had no moves left on the board. He looked at Leah, his expression a mix of desperate pleading and deep venom. He asked her how she could destroy everything her grandfather built just for the sake of an old janitor's ancient grudge.
Leah walked up the stage steps, her eyes cold and unyielding. She looked at the man who had stolen her family's peace and told him that she wasn't destroying her grandfather's legacy, she was cleaning it. She turned her head toward the grand entrance as the doors opened for the final time tonight.
The grand entrance door swung wide, and the flashing blue and red lights of federal law enforcement vehicles illuminated the snow falling outside the gallery windows. This time, there were no tactical suits. 2 senior special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation walked into the ballroom, accompanied by the United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. They walked directly to the stage, their footsteps echoing in the dead quiet of the room. The lead agent pulled a federal arrest warrant from his coat jacket. He read the charges aloud: grand larceny of cultural property, wire fraud, international money laundering, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Marcus Vance did not resist. He allowed the agents to turn him around and place his hands behind his back. The metallic ring of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the loudest sound in the room. As he was led down the stage, he passed Arthur. He stopped for a split second, his voice a desperate whisper, asking how a man could live in the dirt for 30 years just to execute a single night of ruin. Arthur looked at him with an expression of profound peace. He told Vance that when you work in restoration, you learn that the finest masterpieces take time to uncover. He told him that the dirt was temporary, but the truth is permanent. Vance was led out into the cold winter air, his face captured by a dozen media cameras that had gathered outside the gates. The syndicate that had ruled the international art black market for a generation was dismantled in less than 2 hours. The guests began to filter out of the ballroom in stunned silence, leaving the grand space empty under the fading golden lights. Leah walked over to the masterpiece painting, which had been moved to the center of the room. The original 17th century lapis lazuli colors seemed to glow with a deep, victorious light. She looked at Arthur, who was standing by the large windows, watching the snow fall over Boston. She walked up to him and handed him a new leather folder containing the official incorporation papers for the Harrison Foundation for Cultural Protection. His name was listed at the top as the permanent executive director, with absolute legal authority over the firm's global restoration operations. Arthur took the folder, his rough fingers tracing the gold lettering of his name. He did not say a word of triumph. He simply looked at Leah, his eyes filled with a quiet paternal pride that reflected her grandfather's memory. He adjusted his coat, walked toward the exit, and left the gallery. For the first time in 30 years, his promise was kept, his hands were clean, and his soul was completely free.